I've been remodeling the sunroom in our house for over 1.5 years. I've screwed up so many times I've lost count. This drawer face was the result of joining 2 pieces of dimensional lumber together, no cuts except the length. I trusted that it would be to size. Never trust dimensional lumber to be correct. Always measure. These drawer faces were designed to be made using trim molding without having a router because at the time I started, I didn't have one. I made the rabbets on the table saw and framed them out with the molding. It's a similar aesthetic to some of the older houses in my area. I've seen a lot of cabinet doors made this way. I know a lot of people these days like shaker style, but in my opinion, these don't look bad at all. If you don't have all the fancy equipment, you can improvise to make these with a table saw and a miter saw. Sometimes it's about fixing your mistakes. Sometimes it's about covering them up so most won't notice. For months or even years after a project, I constantly see the flaws in my work. However, others never really seem to care at all. Even if you think it's the end of the world, just keep plugging through and finish. That's the main battle. I make it look as nice as I can and remember the lessons for next time. I always think the old saying of measuring twice, cut once is inaccurate. I measure as often as possible throughout the process, checking myself many times. This is what I get for not following that practice. This room is the largest remodeling project I've ever done. Before this, I've never made cabinets before at all. I actually learned from numerous sources here on YouTube, especially from Bourbon Moth. I've learned a lot from making these cabinets. I ignored most tutorials saying to build carcasses in sections and then assemble inside the room. I built a lot of components in place, so there are some square issues that exist, but I've either fixed or will cover them up with finish trim. Hopefully a secret only I will see. Here I'm attaching a 2.5-inch board to the bottom to achieve my full width of 14.25. Basically means I took the 14 inches, cut off about 2.25. Now I'm adding 2.5 back. All for the sake of a 1/4 inch. But I promise you it was visible when you compared it with the other drawer faces. Here I'm using a modified dowel jig from Harbor Freight. I went cheap. But I found with 2 set screws on one side, you can actually get accurate holes with this cheap jig. Here I'm drilling some 5/16 holes for some dowel pins just to keep everything aligned. I don't have bar clamps or anything fancy, so I'll take whatever I can get to keep everything straight when I'm gluing up. Do a little quick dry mock-up to make sure my holes are at least kind of close. Knowing that, I'm ready for glue up after a little deburring. These are yet another Harbor Freight special, but these clamps work pretty well. They do kind of bow and come out of square if you tighten them down too much, but if you're careful and use them right, they'll be okay. Notice here how I clamp on one side but not the other, foreshadowing for later. Another good tip is that baby wipes work really well for glue cleanup, something only a parent could discover. As I predicted, there's an uneven spot on this side because I didn't clamp it, but it's pretty easy to fix. I'll just hit it with the sander. I find that you can fix mostly anything, but the cost is always time. In most other woodworking videos, this is when they'll whip out the fancy Festool circular sander, or whatever they call it. This comment comes with a tinge of jealousy, but, you know, I have a Black & Decker. When I started this project, I actually didn't have a router, but I finally got one. I hope it'll make the rabbit extremely easy compared to the table saw setup I have. The fence always wanders and I had to do a special jig just to get them done. Once I use this router for a while, I'll actually give a review for it, but I have high hopes. You gotta love my sheetrock workbench. Plans are coming for free. Really, I have plans to do flat storage up above in my shop, but I haven't gotten the material to do that yet. So until then, I'm using clamps on sheetrock. One bad thing about the Harbor Freight clamps is the little rubber tips always come off. Overall, the router did pretty well. It was mostly user error that created some bad spots, but it'll cover up when I put the trim molding on there. Except for some gaps that need some extreme wood putty. Although I've been a machinist, it's probably been over 15 years since I've actually used a router, so forgive me. I'm not terribly precise when I'm cutting molding for framing these out, but I'll typically cut one end to make it right, move it over, measure it, and then cut the other side after marking a 45. Definitely got to get more glue. Mostly a few nail holes and some minor gaps. Some wood putty will fix that right up. Except for that gap on the side, which is obviously god-awful.
I'm Jorge. I made the spackle.
Another +1 for baby wipes, they're also good for cleaning up wood filler. After filling imperfections, I always try to wipe off the excess so I don't have to sand it all off in the end. Since this is intended to be painted, I haven't been really worried about filling in holes or anything. If this were a hardwood project, I would be much more precise. All in all, it doesn't look too bad. After a light sanding and a coat of paint, this thing might be presentable. Except for this thing. Blech. After another unnecessary wardrobe change, I decided to give it a sand. Although it's hours of my life I'll never get back, it was necessary to fix this mistake so I could move on. And every time I look at these drawers, I'll think to myself, that's where I messed up, but I made it right.